After my sister got pregnant, I was forced out of the house. I worked tirelessly and eventually managed to buy a house for $60,000. Over time, I came to realize the lies surrounding my situation. For as long as I can remember, I've known I was never truly wanted. I was the unplanned child, the mistake, something my parents didn't intend. I understood this as soon as I was old enough to grasp language, and they made it clear without even trying. My sister, however, was different. Lily was desired, planned, and eagerly anticipated. I recall hearing them speak when I was younger, their voices floating through the walls as if it didn't matter who overheard. "She's perfect," my mom would say, and my dad would nod in agreement. "She's exactly what we hoped for." It didn't matter that I was nearby, just a room away. I knew Lily was everything they'd ever wanted, and I was just there. She was their golden child, and I was merely the other kid, the shadow they hardly acknowledged. It wasn't just their words, their actions echoed the same sentiment. Every decision, every day, they showered Lily with attention and praise. Every little thing she did was treated like a miracle. When she took her first steps, they called the entire family to share the news. I can barely remember my own first steps. No one recorded them. No one cheered. This went on for as long as I can remember. Growing up, the house never felt like home. My room was tucked away in the far corner, small and cramped, with a narrow bed, a creaky dresser, and a lopsided shelf. I used to joke to myself that it was where they put me to forget I existed. My room felt like an afterthought, a storage closet they converted only because they needed somewhere to put me. In contrast, Lily's room could have graced a magazine cover. She had a canopy bed with fluffy pink bedding, fairy lights strung around, and shelves filled with dolls and stuffed animals. Her room looked meticulously designed, as though crafted to make her feel special, like a princess's chamber. Meanwhile, my room barely had space for me to turn around. The walls were painted a dull beige, unchanged since my birth. I once tried to put up posters, but they kept peeling off due to the old paint. Eventually, I stopped trying to make it look nice, realizing there was little point in pretending it was anything more than a place they put me because they didn't know what else to do with me. The difference extended to clothes and toys, too. Lily always got new outfits, colorful dresses with matching shoes and accessories. Her closets overflowed with clothes she couldn't even wear often. I, on the other hand, wore hand-me-downs from cousins, friends, even neighbors, clearing out old things. I remember wearing shirts that were too tight, pants that were too short, and shoes that were falling apart. They handed me these things like a charity case, as though I should be grateful for having anything at all. Birthdays were the worst. They would throw extravagant parties for Lily, inviting her school friends, decorating the house with balloons and streamers, renting bounce houses and magicians. For my birthdays, they'd throw something together at the last minute, maybe pick up a cake from the grocery store, light a candle, and call it done. No friends, no decorations, no sense of celebration. They'd just pat me on the back, say happy birthday, and move on, as if it were any ordinary day. Even my achievements went unnoticed. I worked hard in school, staying up late to study and consistently earning good grades. Once, I won a science fair award, and I came home with the certificate, feeling a rare moment of pride. I thought, maybe this will make them notice me, show them I'm worth something, but when I showed them, they barely glanced at it. My dad muttered, "Good job, keep it up," without even looking up from his phone. My mom gave me a polite smile, the kind you give when you're not really paying attention. But when Lily scored an A on a test, they celebrated as if she had won the Nobel Prize. They took her out to dinner, told everyone they knew, and bragged about how brilliant she was. Meanwhile, my achievements were shrugged off, treated as ordinary. I could have been as straight a student or a prodigy, and it wouldn't have mattered. They didn't want me, they never had. I was just there. I remember trying to talk to them about it once. I must have been about 12, old enough to realize something was wrong, but still hopeful that maybe I could change it. I asked my mom why they treated Lily so differently, why she got everything while I got almost nothing. She looked at me with a weary expression, as if I were a burden for even asking. "Look," she said, "we're doing the best we can. Lily needs things you don't. She's special." It wasn't the words, but the casual way she dismissed me that hurt most. She didn't deny that Lily was the favorite. She didn't pretend to care about my feelings. She said it like it was an obvious truth, something I should have known all along. That was the moment I stopped trying. I realized then that no matter what I did, no matter how hard I worked or how much I accomplished, they would never see me. They had made up their minds long ago. Lily was their golden child, the one they loved, the one they'd wanted. I was just the other kid, the unplanned one they could barely tolerate. I began spending most of my time in my room, isolating myself, retreating into my own world. I'd lose myself in books, video games, anything to escape my reality. My room may have been small and cramped, but at least it was mine. It was the only place where I didn't have to watch them adore Lily, where I didn't have to feel like an outsider in my own family. Over the years, I learned to stop caring about their approval. I threw myself into my studies, not because I thought it would make them notice me, but because it was the one area I could control, the one place I could prove my own worth. I excelled not for them, but for myself. I became the top student in my class, won awards and earned scholarships, but I kept it all to myself. I knew they wouldn't care, so I stopped telling them. It was easier that way, easier to go through the motions, to let them live in their world where Lily was the center, and I was just a shadow. Looking back, I see how those years shaped me, taught me to rely on myself, to find my own value. I learned to depend on myself and build a life that didn't hinge on their approval. It wasn't simple, but it strengthened me, showing me that I didn't need them, that I could carve out my own space in the world, even if they never noticed. I'm not sure if they realized the harm they caused, if they even saw how they wore me down bit by bit until I was a shadow of what I could have been. Maybe they knew and just didn't care, or perhaps they were so lost in their own world that they never saw me standing right there. Either way, it no longer matters. I stopped needing them a long time ago. I learned to find my own path, to form my own identity, separate from a family that never truly wanted me. They can keep their golden child, their perfect little Lily. I've learned to be content on my own, to find strength in solitude, and to be proud of what I've achieved on my own terms. Maybe they thought they could break me, push me down until I faded away, but all they did was make me stronger, more determined to show I didn't need them. They may have given me life, but they didn't give me purpose. That's something I found on my own, in the quiet, in the shadows, in the places they never cared to look. In a way, I'm thankful for it, the isolation, the neglect, the way they pushed me aside, because it taught me I didn't need them, that I could stand alone, that I could stand alone, that I could walk my own path. Now, as I reflect on those years, I realize I am better off without them. I'm tougher, more resilient, ready for whatever comes next, and I don't need their approval, their affection, or their attention to move forward. I never did. The only real family I had was my grandfather. In a world where I was mostly ignored, treated like I was invisible, he was the one person who saw me for who I was. He wasn't overly expressive, but he had a warmth that made me feel safe, something rare in that house. On weekends, he'd take me fishing or to the park, where we'd sit together in silence that felt comfortable, as if the rest of the world faded away, leaving just the two of us. He was the only one who asked about my day, who cared about the small things. He taught me how to ride a bike, tie a fishing knot, and build a birdhouse. Those memories became my lifeline, the moments I clung to when I felt alone and unwanted. I remember one day vividly. I was about 10 when he took me to his favorite spot by the lake. We sat there, fishing rods in hand, and he turned to me with a smile. "You're a good kid," he said, patting my shoulder. "Don't let anyone make you feel like you're not. You've got a lot of heart, and that's something no one can take from you." His words stuck with me more than he probably knew. In a house where I felt like an outsider, he made me feel like I belonged, even if it was just in those brief, stolen moments. He never treated me like a burden, never looked at me as an afterthought. To him, I was enough as I was. Sometimes he'd slip me $1 or $2 with a smile, telling me to buy myself something nice. It was a small gesture, but to me it meant the world. He was the only one who ever made me feel special. Then he got sick. I was around 13 when he started to fade, and it was like watching my last anchor slowly drift away. The man who'd once been strong, who'd lifted me on his shoulders and taught me how to skip stones, was reduced to a shadow of himself. I watched him wither away, each visit to the hospital chipping away at the man I once knew. When he passed, I felt like I'd lost the only piece of my family that truly mattered. The funeral was a blur. My parents were there, of course, but it seemed like they were just going through the motions, standing by the casket with dry eyes, murmuring condolences to people they barely knew. Lily, as always, was the center of attention. People fussed over her, asking if she was all right, as though she'd been the one who'd spent years with him. I stood there, numb and alone, watching as they pretended to care. They moved on quickly, as if nothing had happened, no words of comfort, no gentle reminders that things would be okay. I was left to grieve alone, to mourn the loss of the only person who'd truly seen me. My parents barely acknowledged it. They were too busy focusing on Lily. As usual, I overheard them talking about how she was taking it so hard, how close she'd been to him. It felt like a slap, a reminder that my feelings, my loss, didn't matter. They only had space in their hearts for Lily. After that, I spent more and more time in my room, retreating into myself, isolating from the rest of the house. My room, small and overlooked as it was, became my sanctuary, the one place where I could be alone with my thoughts, where I could remember my grandfather without interruption. I'd sit there for hours, replaying our memories, holding on to every piece of him that I could. But even that small comfort was taken from me. Lily became pregnant at 16, and my parents decided the only way to make room for her new family was to take over my room. I'll never forget how they told me. They didn't ask or discuss it with me. My mom just walked into my room one day and told me to pack my things. "We need this space for Lily," she said, her tone as if it was the most obvious thing in the world. "She's going to need all the room she can get with the baby." I stood there, stunned, trying to process what she was saying. "But where am I supposed to go?" I asked. She sighed, as if I was the one being unreasonable. "We set up the basement for you, it'll be fine. You don't need much space anyway," and that was that. No discussion, no negotiation. I was forced out of the only room I'd ever called my own and sent to the damp, dark basement while Lily moved into my space, taking over everything that had once been mine. They didn't even help me with my belongings. I was left to drag my bed, dresser, books, and anything else I could carry down the narrow staircase to the basement, which they'd hastily thrown together as my new room. The basement was pathetic. It was cold and damp, with walls lined by exposed pipes and old boxes. They'd thrown an old, worn-out mattress on the floor with a rickety table and a chair that looked like it had been pulled out of a dumpster. There was a single light bulb hanging from the ceiling, flickering on and off, as though it couldn't decide if it wanted to stay on or leave me in darkness. And yet, they expected me to live there, to consider it my home, as if it was anywhere close to the comfort Lily enjoyed upstairs. The worst part was the dampness. I could feel it in the air, a cold, clinging moisture that seeped into my bones, making it impossible to ever feel warm. I'd wake up in the middle of the night, shivering, pulling the thin blanket closer around me, but it was never enough. I'd lie there staring at the ceiling, listening to the sounds of the house above, the muffled laughter, the footsteps, the occasional burst of music. They were up there, living their lives, while I was down here, forgotten and alone. The electricity was unreliable too. Some nights, the light would flicker and go out, leaving me in complete darkness. I'd sit there, waiting for it to come back, feeling the walls closing in around me. I knew they didn't care if the lights stayed off, if the basement flooded, or if I disappeared altogether. They had Lily, and that was all that mattered to them. I tried to make the best of it, to turn the basement into something that felt like mine. I put up some posters, brought down a few of my books, tried to arrange the space in a way that made it feel less like a prison cell. But no matter what I did, it was still the basement. It was still a place they'd put me because they didn't have room for me in their lives. My grandfather would have never let it happen. He would have fought for me, told them to find another way, made them see that I was worth more than a damp corner of the basement. But he was gone, and there was no one left to stand up for me, no one left to tell them that I mattered. So I stayed there, night after night, in the dark, damp basement, clinging to the memories of the only person who'd ever cared. I'd think about him, about the things he'd said, the way he'd made me feel like I was worth something, and I held on to those memories, even as the rest of the world turned its back on me. They could take my room, my comfort, my sense of security, but they couldn't take the memories of my grandfather. They couldn't take away the one thing that kept me going, the belief that somewhere deep inside, I was worth more than they ever saw in me. And in the cold, lonely darkness of the basement, that was the only warmth I had. After a couple of years enduring the basement, I came to realize that staying in that house, Trying to pretend I was part of a family that didn't want me wasn't an option anymore. I knew I had to leave, to build a life on my terms, far from the toxic environment that had always held me back. So at 17, I made up my mind I was going to find a job and finally break free. I started looking around town, asking at shops, diners, anywhere that might take someone with no experience but plenty of determination. One day, I wandered into a small mechanic shop on the edge of town. It was an unassuming place with a modest sign that read Tom's Auto Repair, but it smelled of oil and steel, and there was something about it that felt real. That's where I met Tom, the owner, a middle-aged man with a wiry frame, a gruff voice, and hands permanently stained with grease. He looked me over with a raised eyebrow when I asked if he had any work. "You know anything about cars?" Kitty asked, sounding doubtful. "No," I admitted, "but I'm willing to learn. I'll work hard, do whatever you need, I need a place to start." He studied me, and I could see the wheels turning in his head. After what felt like forever, he nodded, almost reluctantly. "All right, I'll give you a shot. I could use an extra hand around here. Pays not much, but it's honest work." The job was tough, but I threw myself into it with everything I had. Tom turned out to be more than just a boss. He became a mentor, someone who taught me more than just how to fix cars. He showed me how to work with my hands, how to solve problems, and most importantly, how to believe in myself. He was strict, sure, but he was fair, and he treated me with a respect I'd never known before. After a few weeks, I mentioned to Tom that I was still living at home, or rather, in the basement. He didn't say much at the time, just nodded thoughtfully. But the next day, he pulled me aside. "Got a spare room in the back," he said, scratching his chin. "It's nothing fancy, but it's got a bed and a door that locks. You're welcome to it if you want. Might be better than that basement you've been stuck in." I was stunned by his generosity, and for a moment I didn't know what to say. "Are you sure? I mean, I don't want to be a burden." He waved a hand, dismissing my concerns. "Kid, I wouldn't offer if I didn't mean it. Besides, it's good to have someone around to help out. You need a place, and I could use the company. So what do you say?" I accepted, and just like that, my life began to change. I moved into the small room at the back of the shop, and for the first time in years, I felt a sense of freedom. It was a simple space, bare walls, a plain bed, a small dresser, but it was mine, and that made all the difference. I was no longer under my family's control. I had a place I could call my own, a roof over my head that wasn't connected to their neglect or indifference. I worked hard at the shop, learning everything I could from Tom. He was patient, teaching me not just the mechanics of cars, but also how to run a business, deal with customers, and take pride in a job well done. He gave me a purpose, something to strive for, and I threw myself into the work, determined to prove myself, to show that I could make something of my life. I saved every penny I earned, living frugally and setting aside as much as I could. It wasn't easy, and there were times when I was tempted to splurge, to buy things I'd always wanted but never had. But I had a goal, a vision of a future where I could finally stand on my own, free from my family and their empty promises. After 3 years of hard work and saving, I had managed to set aside $20,000. I'd been careful, only spending on what I needed, living in that small room at the shop, and slowly building up a decent nest egg. I began looking at properties, dreaming of a place I could truly call my own, a home that I had built with my own hands. I found a modest little house on the outskirts of town, a fixer-upper that had seen better days but had potential. The asking price for the house was $660,000, and while I didn't have enough to pay for it outright, my savings were enough for a substantial down payment. I managed to secure a small loan, and with Tom's support and encouragement, I bought the house. It took 3 years of hard work, sweat, and sacrifice, but I finally had a place to call my own. Renovating the house became a personal project. I spent my evenings and weekends fixing it up, repairing the roof, painting the walls, and laying down new flooring. It was exhausting, but each nail I hammered, each wall I painted brought me a step closer to creating the life I had always wanted. This place was mine, truly mine, and for the first time I felt like I was steering my own path. Life felt good. I had independence, a job I loved, and a home that was all mine. I felt proud, accomplished, as if I had finally freed myself from the shadow of my past. But just when I thought I had left that life behind, my family came back into the picture. It began with a phone call from my mother. She'd heard about the house, about the success I'd carved out for myself, and suddenly she seemed filled with concern, acting as though she'd been there for me all along. She asked about the house and my work, her voice full of forced cheer, but I could sense the true motive behind it. They wanted back in, to share in what I had built. A few days later, they appeared unannounced at my doorstep, with Lily in tow. I opened the door, surprised, and for a moment I just stood there, staring at them, unsure of what to say. "Ethan," my mother said, stepping forward with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, "we heard you've done so well for yourself. You have this lovely house now, and we thought it might be nice if we could all be together again." I knew what she was really asking, even if she didn't say it outright. They wanted to move in, to take advantage of the life I had built as if they'd been part of it, as if they'd played any role in my success. I looked at them, at Lily standing there with that familiar smirk, and felt a surge of anger, a reminder of everything they'd put me through, of everything they had taken from me. "I don't think so," I said, my voice steady but firm. "I built this on my own. I worked hard for this, and I'm not about to let you walk back into my life, just because it's convenient for you." My father's face reddened, and I saw a flash of anger in his eyes. "We're family," he said, as though that word could erase years of neglect, all the nights I'd spent alone in the basement, all the times they had chosen Lily over me. "You can't just turn us away." "I can, and I replied, crossing my arms. "You didn't care about me then, and you don't care about me now. You only care about what you can get from me. Well, I'm done. I don't need you, and I don't owe you anything." My mother tried to argue, attempting to guilt me by listing all the things they'd supposedly done for me, but her words felt empty, hollow echoes of a past I had left behind. I had built this life without them, and I wasn't about to let them take it from me. They left, their faces a mix of anger and disbelief, and as I watched them drive away, I felt a strange sense of relief, a weight lifting from my shoulders. I had finally stood up for myself, finally broken free from the last ties that had bound me to that toxic family. I was my own person, independent, self-sufficient, and I had no intention of going back. As I closed the door and looked around my little house, I felt a surge of pride, a reminder of everything I had achieved, everything I had built from the ground up. This was my life, my success, and I had earned it on my terms. I didn't need them, and I never had. I had a home, a job, a future that was mine alone, and for the first time I felt truly free. It was almost by accident that I uncovered what my parents had done. One afternoon, while going through some old boxes in my basement, I stumbled upon a file folder with my grandfather's handwriting on it. It was dusty and worn, and I hadn't seen it since before he passed away. I opened it up, and what I found inside left me both shocked and furious. The folder held documents related to an inheritance he had set aside for me, something I had never known about until that moment. As I sifted through the paperwork, I began to piece together what he had left for me, a substantial sum of money intended to support my future. I couldn't believe it. My grandfather had left me a financial cushion, something to help me get started in life, a foundation to build upon. But I had never seen a cent of it. I took the documents to Mr. Grant, my lawyer, the same one who had helped me handle my family's earlier attempt to disrupt my business. He reviewed the paperwork, his expression growing darker as he examined the details. "This is serious, Ethan," he said, looking up from the pages. "It appears your parents illegally accessed this inheritance, diverting it to accounts in your sister's name. They had no right to that money. It was yours, and they misappropriated it." Mr. Grant leaned back, his eyes narrowing as he considered my options. "You can take them to court. This is a clear case of fraud, and with these documents, we have more than enough evidence to build a strong case. You have every right to claim what was left to you, and they should be held accountable for what they've done." It didn't take long for me to decide. I wasn't going to let them get away with this. They had stolen from me, taken what was mine, and used it to benefit Lily, just like they always had. But this time they wouldn't walk away without facing the consequences. I was finished with being the silent sufferer, done with letting them walk over me as if I didn't exist. I was determined to fight, and I was determined to win. The legal battle was exhausting, filled with court dates, depositions, and endless rounds of paperwork. Naturally, my parents fought back, denying everything, and trying to play the role of innocent victims. They claimed they'd only done what was best for the family, saying they used the money for Lily because she needed it more than I did. It was the same excuse I'd heard my whole life, the same reasoning they'd given every time they prioritized her needs above mine. But this time, it wasn't going to be enough. Mr. Grant was relentless, tearing their defense apart, exposing their lies and deceit for everyone to see. The evidence against them was overwhelming, and as the trial wore on, I could see the fear in their eyes. They knew they were going to lose, and they realized there was nothing they could do to stop it. When the verdict was announced, I felt a sense of vindication I'd never experienced before. The judge ruled in my favor, stating that my parents had indeed committed fraud and illegally accessed my inheritance. They were ordered to pay restitution, compensating me for the money they had taken and for the emotional damage their actions had caused. For the first time in my life, I felt like I had won. I had reclaimed something they had stolen from me, something they had no right to, and I'd forced them to face the consequences of their actions. After the trial, I felt a sense of closure I hadn't anticipated. Winning the case wasn't just about the money, it was about finally standing up for myself, refusing to be their victim any longer. I had always felt powerless against them, like I was subject to their will. But now, I understood that wasn't true. I had a voice, and I had the strength to use it. With the compensation I received, I could secure my future and build a life that was truly my own, free from their influence and toxicity. I cut all ties with them, refusing to allow them any more control over my life. They had shown me time and again that they didn't care about me, that they'd never valued me, and I was done trying to make them see me. I was done trying to earn a place in a family that had never wanted me. Letting go of the idea of family, severing the ties that had connected me to them for so long, wasn't easy, but I knew it was the only way to move forward, to find peace and build a life on my own terms. I came to realize that family isn't about blood, it's about love, respect, and the people who stand by you when it counts. My grandfather had shown me that. He'd been the only person who ever truly valued me, and now I knew I could carry his memory with me, honoring him by living a life that was free, a life that was mine. As I continued to grow my business, I expanded it, watching it flourish. I made new friends, people who felt like family, who supported me and believed in me in ways my biological family never had. I found a sense of belonging, a sense of peace that I'd never known growing up. Through it all, I held on to the lessons my grandfather had taught me, the love he had given me, and the confidence he'd instilled in me. I could see how far I'd come, how much I had grown, and I knew I had made the right choice. I had broken free from the chains of a toxic family, from the lies and betrayals, and I had built a life that was truly mine. I had found my strength, my resilience, and I knew that, no matter what challenges lay ahead, I was ready to face them. I was finally free, finally at peace, and I knew I had a future full of possibilities, a future I could shape on my own terms. I realized that family doesn't always mean the people you're related to. It's about those who care for you, who respect you, who stand by you when it matters. I had found my family in the friends I'd made and in the life I'd built, and I knew my grandfather would have been proud. I had reclaimed what was mine, defended my right to live on my terms, and I was ready to embrace the life waiting for me, free from the past, free from the pain. I was finally ready to live. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to subscribe and listen to new stories every day. Let us know in the comments what resonated with you the most.